I've got 3 videos that are all about questions that you should ask at the end of an interview. And I've even got one video with 5 tips that help you apply to an internal job. But I don't have any videos that talk specifically about questions that you should ask at the end of an internal interview. Hey, my name is Abby and welcome back to the Life Work Balance YouTube channel. Today I'm going to share with you 10 potential questions that you can ask at the end of an internal interview. Before I jump into that, if you're looking forward to hearing the 10 potential questions that you could ask at the end of an interview, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. So first things first. An internal interview will only occur if you are currently an employee of an organization and you're applying to a job within that same organization. So internal interviews are only going to occur if you're already an employee of the organization that you're applying to. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've got a video that gives you 5 tips on how to apply for an internal job. So if you haven't watched that already, I would highly recommend doing so and then coming back to watch this one, because that video will give you all the tips that you need to create a stellar application and to really prepare for the interview process. And this video will be specifically about the questions that you should ask at the end of an interview. I have mentioned in many of my videos when it comes to interview prep that you should always, hands down, prepare a minimum of 3 questions to ask at the end of an interview. It's no different with an internal interview. However, internal interviews can feel a little bit different than your typical interview. You may be interviewing with people who you work closely with or who you know fairly well within the organization. So an internal interview can sometimes feel harder to prepare for than your standard interview. You're not necessarily sure how to behave in this interview. Maybe you're worried about it being too professional or maybe too casual. So if you're worried about any of that, definitely watch my video with the 5 tips to help you apply to an internal job. When you are doing an internal interview, it can sometimes feel like there are no questions that you really have when it comes to the interview process, when it comes to the position or the organization. It may seem like you already know everything there is to know. Maybe you've done your due diligence and you've interviewed people on your own before your actual interview to figure out what sorts of things they know about the position, about the team that you're working with. So it might feel like there's not really an opportunity for you to have questions prepared to ask. However, it is essential that you do have questions prepared for the end of your internal interview. And I have 10 example questions that I would like to share with you today. The first question that I could recommend you ask during your internal interview is, what do you think my biggest challenge will be moving into this role? This is a great question to ask because you've just completed your interview. You have given answers to many of the questions that they've asked. They've gone over your education, your experience. They know that you already work for the organization. So this is a really good opportunity for them, the interviewers, to bring up any challenges that they foresee you, as the specific individual, facing in this role. They may know more about you than they do an external candidate. So they may have specific challenges that they're aware of that you could potentially face. So this is not only great insight for you before you start in the role, if you were to get it, but it's also an opportunity for you to address how you might address those challenges with the interviewers in the moment. It's sometimes hard to ask questions like that. So I highly recommend building up the courage to be able to ask a question like this, because the interviewers will be fairly impressed that you have the self-awareness to recognize that you will face challenges in this role, and they'll also be impressed because you will be demonstrating that you're asking for feedback. A similar question, and one of the questions that I always recommend asking at the end of an interview, is the hesitation question. So the question that you could ask at the end of your internal interview that is somewhat hesitation-based is, do you have any concerns or hesitations about my experience that could hinder my success in this position? Now, the reason you're asking this is because they know you better than typical candidates. You have just given them a pretty thorough interview where they've asked you lots of questions, you've given good answers, and they also know you outside of this interview process. So they may have some concerns or hesitations. And it's great to ask this question because, again, not only does it demonstrate that you're open to receiving feedback and that you request feedback, but it also gives you the opportunity to really expand on those concerns and hesitations and show them and demonstrate to them how you will be able to be successful in the position, even if they have those concerns and hesitations. This is somewhat an opportunity for you to defend yourself, to really prove that you're going to be the best fit for this position. You can also ask a role-specific question. This question is something that you could ask in any type of interview, whether it's an internal interview or whether you're an external candidate interviewing. And this question is, what do you see as the biggest priorities for this role in the first 30, 60, and 90 days? It is great to ask this question because it will give you the opportunity to understand the priorities for the position. And you will be able to hit the ground running and be prepared to address anything that might be thrown at this position because you already know what the expectations are for the first 30, 60, and 90 days. Because you may know the person who was in the role that you are now applying to fill, you can also ask some questions about what their strengths and maybe weaknesses were. So you can frame your question like this. Can you tell me about the person who was last in this role? What did they do really well? And what gaps did they have that I could fill? So by asking that question, that gets the interviewers to reflect on the person who was previously in this role and really think about what they did well, what their strengths were, and what some of their weaknesses or gaps were. And then you can really take that information and you can use that to your advantage to do the same things that that person did really well and also to do some things differently to fill in the gaps that they were not able to provide. The next two questions are also questions that you can ask in any type of interview, but are also well fitted for an internal interview. And these two questions are, what does success look like in this role? And what would it look like if I wasn't meeting the expectations of this role? These are two great questions to ask regardless of any interview you're in, because it gives you the expectations of what success looks like and what success doesn't look like. And that ideally will set you up for success for actually being in the position. You know what success looks like and you know what success doesn't look like right from the beginning. So you can go ahead and implement those strategies to be successful and to also have those warning signs for if you are not necessarily meeting expectations. The final four questions are a little bit more personal for the interviewers. So this really gets them talking, which is always a good thing to end an interview with the interviewers doing some talking because they tend to feel better about themselves after they've shared some personal information. So the first more personal question that you can ask the interviewer during an internal interview is, what do you like most about working on this team? What do you like most about working for this organization? That's a great question for anyone who's on your interview panel or anyone who is interviewing you, because it really gets them thinking about why they like doing what they're doing, why they like the work that they do, why they like the team that they're working with, and why they like working for the organization. It is more of a conversation builder because it's likely that you have similar reasons as to why you like working for the organization, and it might be fun to compare notes. The final three questions are still along the lines of those personal questions specifically for the interviewers, but these questions are more tailored to someone who would be managing you. So if your new supervisor or manager is in the interview panel, these are questions that you could direct specifically at them. So the first is, can you share an example of how the team has handled conflict in the past? This will give you a good idea of how the team that you may be joining handles conflict, and if that matches your conflict style or if you might have to adjust a bit to learn the way that the team functions. The second more personal question for the manager or supervisor on your potential new team is, what is your preferred supervisory or management style? Again, it's a great opportunity to ask this question because you might realize that this person isn't going to be the best fit for you for a new manager. Or based on their answer to this question, you could really decide this could work well for you. This also, again, just opens the door for communication about how this manager or supervisor prefers to manage and supervise. And having that information and data is perfect for starting a new job. Most people who are starting their new job are flying blind and really have to learn the ropes about the team and the managers that they're working with quickly. If you have this information up front during your internal interview, it can make the process a lot smoother. And then the final question that you can ask your new potential manager or supervisor is, can you share with me an example of a time you had to give someone on your team critical feedback? Again, this is just insight into how they manage and supervise and communicate with the people that they're working with. This will be great insight for you to make the decision on if this person will be a good fit when it comes to managers or supervisors. The number one reason why people leave their jobs is because of a poor relationship with their manager or supervisor. If you can recognize those warning signs right off the bat, then you don't waste your time moving into a new position from a position that you are already qualified and probably successful in. And when you have these warning signs up front, you will be able to make the best decision for you from a professional standpoint. So hopefully you found these questions helpful when it comes to preparing for your internal interview. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or ideas about internal interview questions that you can ask at the end of an interview, please go ahead and put them in the comments box below. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And as I mentioned at the end of all of my videos, if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life-work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.